Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is part two of the two-part presentation on the results of the 2025 Chopin competition. This one we're calling Justice for Khrukuli. Fans of David Khrukuli will be particularly interested in sections 3 and especially section 4 of this presentation. So at the end of the part 1, we left you in a bit of a cliffhanger. We were looking at the 11 competitors who made the final and which of the 17 juror members scored that competitor the highest relative to the juror's personal distribution, which scored him the lowest relative to these jurors' personal distributions. And on the high side, we found that Krzysztof Jabłoński jumps out, scoring Kevin Chen 2.2 standard deviations above Jabłoński's scoring distribution mean, while on the low side, Eva Pobocka scored David Khrukuli 1.8 standard deviations below Pobocka's mean. So this begs the question, what if? What would have happened if the rules had been changed slightly or there were slightly different circumstances behind this year's competition? So that invites us down the rabbit hole of alternative realities where we ask, what if the jury or the rules had been changed slightly in this year's competition? So I'm going to take you through 4 different scenarios that we'll talk about and have data to back up. First is, did Jabłoński put his thumb on the scale? Followed by, let's give a voice to the teachers. Then, sorry you couldn't make it. Followed by EOJ, which is exclusion of outlier jurors. And again, Khrukuli fans will particularly be interested in the 3rd and 4th sections here. So let's dive right into, did Jabłoński put his thumb on the scale? What we're talking about here is that Kevin Chen has a student-instructor relationship with Krzysztof Jabłoński. That's disclosed very transparently on Kevin Chen's bio on the Chopin competition website. That's all well and good. There's nothing wrong with that. Normally, juror instructors abstain from scoring their students. In this case, Jabłoński did score Chen because the dates of his student-instructor relationship preceded the look back. In this case, jurors are only required to consider a competitor their student if they are currently studying with them or have studied with them since the end of the previous Chopin competition in 2021. Now, I don't know exactly when Kevin Chen studied with Krzysztof Jabłoński, but I asked ChatGPT to pull together an estimate, and GTP said it is most likely that Chen studied under Jabłoński in the years 2015 through 2020. So everything's on the up and up here. That was before the end of the prior competition, so no need for Jabłoński to have abstained from scoring Kevin Chen. Now, as a reminder, the rules of what constitutes a student are very cleanly laid out in the rule book of the Chopin committee, and that is any of the 3 criteria. If those are met, then it is considered a student. Somebody who is currently studying with a member of the jury, has been a student of a jury member since the conclusion of the 18th competition in 2021, or a catch-all category, has a relationship with a member of the jury that could make an impartial evaluation difficult. None of these 3 were met under the opinion of Jabłoński, so he went ahead and scored Kevin Chen throughout the 4 stages of the competition. And did he ever score Kevin Chen? In fact, Jabłoński scored all 24s and a single 25 for Kevin Chen, 3 24s and a single 25. And that kind of jumps out. It may catch your attention, but to be fair, this wasn't the only instance in which a competitor received all 24s and above from a single juror. It happened twice for Kevin Chen, in fact, once from Jabłoński, and Michal Bayroff also scored all 24s and 25s for Kevin Chen. Tianyu Li received straight 24s across the board from Sa Chen, and Vincent Ong received all 24s and 25s from Momo Kodama. And if you're wondering whether these scores really are remarkable, well, what caught my attention with Kevin Chen is the deviation from Jabłoński's normal score, and that's what we were looking at earlier. In fact, Jabłoński's average score across all stages and all competitors was 18, so getting 24s and 25s is quite remarkable. In the other 3 jurors' cases, their average scores were all in the 20 to 22 range, so not quite as much upside as we saw out of Jabłoński for Kevin Chen. And if you're you're wondering where Eric Lu is, well, he didn't receive 24 plus from any single juror across the board, but he did receive 23 plus from 2 jurors in each of the 4 stages, Mihail Bayarov again and Momo Kodama again. So Kevin Chen keeping some really good company with Eric Lu, Tianyu Li, and Vincent Ong. Now let's keep those 24s and 25s in perspective for Jabłoński. The 25 that he gave to Kevin Chen was the one and only perfect score of 25 that Jabłoński handed out throughout the competition. But he did give out several 24s, 8 of them, in fact. We already know 3 of those were for Kevin Chen, so that means there were 5 other 24s that Jabłoński submitted during the competition, and those went to Tianyu Li in the second stage, a 24, Tianyao Liu, a 24 in the first stage, and again in the fourth stage, Vincent Ong, a 24 in the first stage, and Tomoharu Ushida, who made it as far as the third stage, received a 24 from Jabłoński in the second stage. So plenty of 24s, a single 25, with Kevin Chen getting 4 out of the 9 total in the 24 plus range for Jabłoński. Now, this just begs the question, how would things have been different if Jabłoński had abstained from scoring Kevin Chen, if he had decided that there was a student-juror relationship in terms of instruction, and he had marked his scorecard with a little S instead of those 24s and 25s? So on the left, we see the actual final results as they were delivered at the end of the competition. And how would these have changed without Jabłoński's scoring Kevin Chen? Well, of course, Kevin Chen's 22.15 is going to go down by a little bit. And indeed, it does go down to 22.02 without the high scores from Jabłoński. But you'll notice that Kevin Chen is still very much in second place. He doesn't drop behind Zitong Wang, let alone behind the fourth place finisher. He's firmly the silver medalist. And I think there are 4 things going on here with regard to things not changing all that much if Jabłoński had abstained from scoring. Number 1, Kevin Chen scored quite high across all jurors. So exceeding 24s and 25s might have been a little bit above Kevin's normal score, but not a ton. So taking out some 24s and 25s from somebody whose weighted mean is 22.15 doesn't move the needle all that much. Secondly, keep in mind that Jabłoński is one of just 17 jurors, so his voice is 1/17 of everybody who scored Kevin Chen. So taking him out isn't as big of a deal, for example, if there were 8 or 9 jurors in the competition. There's also a third factor, keep in mind, thresholds that are set. This is the C-mean approach to scoring, which is described in part 1 of this presentation, whereby if your score is more than a fixed threshold above the mean or below the mean, your score is marked back to the high end or low end of that mean plus or minus threshold. And in at least one case, Jabłoński's high score was marked down towards the mean, where he was detected as an outlier by the current scoring system. And finally, note the margins, fourth and final factor, note the margins between the competitors at the high end of this table. Kevin Chen about 3/10 of a point behind Eric Lu, but 7/10 of a point ahead of Zitong Wang after the final results were tallied. Those margins between first and second third are very wide compared to the margins that you see as you look farther down the table, where 1/100th of a point or 2/100ths of a point were often separating competitors. So wide margins also has a lot to do with not changing things all that much if we had seen an abstention of Jabłoński's scores for Kevin Chen. So this does open up additional rabbit holes of analyses that we're going to jump down now. And second is, let's give a voice to the teachers. So we were just talking about abstentions of scores from teachers for their student competitors, but let's say that every teacher does have a score, but it's determined mathematically rather than through a subjective score coming from the teacher. And there's a reason for this, and that is that jurors have inherent tendencies in their scores. Some are high-scoring jurors and others are low-scoring jurors. And if you happen to have a juror on the panel who is your instructor and that juror is a generous scorer, you are at a disadvantage, all things being equal, because you are being abstained from a juror who might otherwise have given you a high score. And on the flip side, of course, if you have a juror instructor who's a very strict scorer, you might be at an advantage relative to the other competitors because you're dodging the bullet on receiving what might be a low objective score from a strict scoring juror. And just to illustrate the difference between high scoring jurors and low scoring jurors, this is a distribution of scores. The blue bars in the center are all jurors throughout the competition, all 17 jurors. The green bars, which peak at higher ranges, come from Sa Chen. She was the highest scoring juror on the jury panel, whereas Krzysztof Jabłoński was the lowest scoring juror on the panel. Jabłoński's average score, as we said, was just 18, well below the juror mean and more than a standard deviation below Sa Chen's scoring mean. Neither Jabłoński nor Chen happens to be a juror instructor, but this just illustrates the different scoring tendencies across the extremes. So it's very easy to impute scores from an abstaining juror instructor. We use a simple methodology called z-scores, and just to illustrate how it might be put into play, take Deng Tai Son, the king of all jurors when it comes to having a ton of students in the competition. He had 10 students in the competition, the first one alphabetically being Kai Min Cheng. Deng Tai Son abstained from scoring Kai Min Cheng as he was required to. Little lowercase s means that's a student relationship, but we can use z-scores. We know the distribution of scores for Kai Min Cheng from the other jurors. We know the distribution of scores from Deng Tai Son for the competitors that he did score, and so we can apply the distributions and back into what's considered a z-score. And in this case, just to make things concrete, we don't know how Deng Tai Son scored Kai Min Cheng because he didn't score him, but using the distributions, we can back into an imputed score of 19 in the lower right corner of this table. So why is this important? Well, Deng Tai Son and Kai Min Cheng aren't the only case study where we had abstained jurors from competitors. In fact, it happened 60 times, 33 in the first stage from 29 competitors. Some competitors had multiple instructors on the jury panel. That's why there are 33 abstained scores in the first round. And as a percentage of total performances, it actually peaks in the third and the fourth stages. We need to impute 2.6% of all scores in the third stage, 2.7% in the fourth stage. So when the stakes are highest and the weights are heaviest is when we most need the data. And we most want to plug the holes that might be leading to hidden advantages or disadvantages for students who are competitors and may have strict or generous scoring jurors on the panel. Who are those jurors? Well, there were 7 of them. 10 jurors did not have any students in the competition. 7 of them did, led by Deng Tai Son. And there are 29 competitors, as I said, who had at least one juror instructor on the panel, including 4 of them who made the finals: Eric Liu, Tianyao Liu, Zitong Wang, and William Yang. So let's plug those holes. So here are the actual final results that we just looked at, 1 through 11, with the prizes that they won in the rightmost column. And how would things have changed if we imputed z-scores for student competitors and had a fully populated scorebook? Well, things change a little bit, but not a ton. One of the notable exceptions is William Yang would no longer be a prize winner if we were imputing scores. And that's just a byproduct of all the ties in the left table. In the left table, there's a tie for 4th and a tie for 5th. On the table on the right, the tie, one of those ties goes away. So we have 1 fewer prize winners, and William Yang, who was the last prize winner in the left table, unfortunately wouldn't have won a prize without the benefit of the magic math that goes into the way ties increase the prize pool. And there are a few folks who drop down out of a tie and into a tie at a lower level. So this isn't a big difference, but it does seem to make things just a lot more fair, because you can see some scores moving down where we have strict jurors who are now brought into the scoring pool, some scores moving up where we have generous jury instructor scores that are imputed and given to those students. So that brings us to the third of the fourth sections that we're going to walk through. That's called Sorry You Couldn't Make It. So we're talking about excluding what we're talking about here is excluding certain jurors from the scoring. We know there are outlier jurors out there. We don't want to exclude them because they're outliers, but because of logistics, it might happen that a juror isn't able to make it to the panel. Now, this isn't as outlandish of a proposition as you might think it is. It happens quite a bit. At the U.S. Chopin competition earlier this year in Miami, Garrick Olson, in fact, wasn't able to participate. So they had to drop the juror ranks by one person because he was recovering from surgery. And at the 2021 Chopin competition, not one but two jurors were forced to back out very late in the stages. One of them was replaced with Arthur Morea Lima, but they dropped the jury pool from 18 to 17 that year because two jurors, Nelson Freire and Marta Argerich, weren't able to participate. And speaking of Marta Argerich, of course, most famous example of all, she stepped aside from the jury after the third stage at the 1980 Chopin competition in protest for how the scores were stacking up. And this is actually a pretty recent article, so you can Google this if you want a recent take on the controversy that took place 45 years ago in Warsaw. So how are we going to calculate scores if we have one fewer jury member on the panel? Well, it's very straightforward. We'll take away one juror, one at a time, leaving panels of 16 jurors, where previously we had 17. We'll do it 17 times. We already have all the raw scores. That's the easy part. So we will calculate new adjusted scores using the thresholds that I talked about earlier for each competitor at each stage with the remaining jury pool that we're having ourselves access to. And then we'll re-rank all the competitors at each stage, calculating their weighted scores in stages 2 through 4, using these new adjusted scores. We will remove competitors who would not have advanced at each stage using these new rankings. So we can take competitors out of the mix and advance those who would have survived, and then we'll just recalculate the prize winners after stage 4, and then look at which of the 11 actual finalists who would have still been in the competition, how they would have ranked. Unfortunately, at step 4 here, what we can't do is introduce competitors into the next stage simply because we don't have any data on how they performed. They went home and didn't get the opportunity to advance, where our model might show that they would have advanced without a single juror on the committee. So let's start with Krzysztof Jabłoński. Why not? We were just talking about him with regard to Kevin Chen. On the left, the actual results. What would the world have looked like if Krzysztof Jabłoński had not been on the jury panel and the other 16 jurors had served throughout? We already know Kevin Chen's score is going to drop from 22.15 to 22.02. We calculated that through the Pro-Forma instructor competitor abstention exercise that we just went through. But what about the other competitors? Well, there are quite a few changes to the rankings. Vincent Ong would not have advanced to the 4th stage, and that is a result of Vincent Ong being a strong scoring competitor within Jabłoński's scoring distribution, and without Jabłoński's support, Vincent Ong actually would fall by the wayside after stage 3. Similarly, David Khrukuli also received high marks from Jabłoński relative to other competitors and would not have made the 4th stage. There would have been a different competitor in the finals, that is Hyo Lee. He would have ranked 10th after the 3rd stage and would have made the finals. We just don't know how he would have ranked after the finals. Tianyao Liu would have dropped from a tie from 4th into a tie for 5th. And of course, Vincent Ong would have lost his tie for 5th by not making it into the finals. So a few changes there, nothing too earth-shattering. We don't see anybody moving up, just people moving down as the prize pool is limited with the elimination of ties that we enjoyed in the actual results, where there were 8 prizes handed out. Now there are only 7 prizes because we don't have the ties. We don't have one of the ties to go around. Now let's take Garrick Olson, our jury chair, out of the mix. How would things have changed? Well, now we start to move the needle a little bit more because Garrick Olson was one of the more higher standard deviation jurors. He had very high scores, very low scores, and taking him out of the mix changes things a bit more. In particular, David Khrukuli moves up into a prize winner's spot. He had just missed out on 6th prize, and if you take Olson out of the mix, Olson was not a big fan of David Khrukuli, so without Olson in the panel, Khrukuli actually moves up one spot from outside the prize pool into the sixth spot. Olson was a fan of William Yang, and without Olson's support, William Yang would not have made the finals. He would have been dismissed after stage 3, but there are several other changes that would have occurred in the first 3 stages, and we can't model how, for example, Gabby Strata would have done in the 3rd stage, because Gabby didn't compete in the 3rd stage, but without Olson on the panel, Gabby would have moved from 22nd place after stage 2 up to 17th place after stage 2, and would have advanced into stage 3 with Yehuda Prokopovich getting dismissed after stage 2 and not advancing to stage 3. And finally, we won't go through all 17 jurors, but let's look at Eva Pobotska as our final case study. Let's take her out of the jury pool and see how results would have changed without her influence on the 4 stages of the competition. Now we see David Khrukuli moving even higher up, and this is where that cliffhanger table that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation comes into play. We saw Khrkuli's biggest downside score came from Eva, and taking Eva out of the mix vaults Khrukuli up not just 1 spot, but 2 spots, all the way into a 5th place tie with Piotr Aleksevich and Tianyao Liu. And Vincent Ong, who was supported by Eva Pobotska, drops out of the competition after the 3rd stage, and then other changes, of course, happen. Earlier stages that we're not able to model, for example, how Tian Kun Ma would have done in the 2nd stage, and again, Gabby Strata would have advanced to the third stage, as he would have under the removal of Garrick Olson. So to try to summarize what happens when we take a juror out of the panel one at a time and then run with the other 16 jurors. This is who would have been eliminated after stage 3 with removal of each of the 17 jurors in each of the rows, and who would have advanced to stage 4 in the event that we're taking out one juror and a tie still remains after stage 3, or excuse me, 1 competitor and a tie still remains, or 2 or more competitors after stage 3. And you see a lot of Hyo Lee, the younger of the Lee brothers, was right on the precipice of advancing into stage 4, and in 9 out of 17 juror removal scenarios, Hyo advances into the final rounds, and Tomoharu Ushida similarly advances into the 4th round under the removal of Akiko Ebi and Nelson Gerner. And the competitors who are on the bubble, sort of the 9th and tied for 10th competitors after stage 3, those being Ong, Khrukuli, and Aleksevich, in many cases don't make the cut with the removal of a supportive juror. And that, of course, brings us to our 4th and final scenario that we're going to walk through. This is one that's a little bit more serious, and it's called EOJ, or Exclusion of Outlier Jurors. This is based on a pretty recent academic paper that was published in the Journal of Cultural Economics a couple of years ago. Its publication date is November 28th, 2023. The authors of the paper are Krzysztof Kontak, who's a former instructor at the Warsaw School of Economics, and Kevin Kenner, who was a jury member this year, and of course a member of the faculty at the Frost School at the University of Miami, which hosts the USA Chopin competition. And this paper is in the public domain, so you can download it and read it at your leisure. Just read the first dozen or so pages if you want to get the flavor of it. What it's all about is a statistical approach to removing jurors based on distance from the median of the overall jury pool. Statisticians love medians when it comes to outlier detections. In this case, these are absolute medians, so I've introduced a normalization factor just to take account for jurors who are abstaining from certain scores, just to make sure all jurors are treated fairly and equally, and those jurors that score more students or more competitors than others don't get additional weight. So through normalization, we can preserve the spirit of how EOJ works. And you'll notice there's a constant. You take the ratio on the left and compare it to a constant K, and kick out jurors if their jury distance, JD sub J, exceeds that K when applied to that formula. formula. Question is, what should K be? Well, the paper provides some guidance on that. They use K equals 3 in the case studies in the paper to, quote, ensure that only true outlier jurors are detected. So that's good. We'll try K equals 3. And farther down in the paper, they say K equals 1.5 is planned for the national competition in October 2023. Given that the paper was published in November of 2023, I'm guessing they actually did go forward with K equals 1.5 application of the EOJ methodology to juror scoring at that particular competition. Similarly, the Szymanowski competition held every 5 years, I think in Katowice, was using the EOJ methodology most recently, although they didn't publish what K value they used for this constant. It's important to realize that a high value of K is permissive. It'll let more jurors through and trap fewer outlier jurors, whereas a low value of K is more sensitive. It will detect more outlier jurors and let fewer jurors through to scoring. And this is applied at the end of each stage, with jurors being eliminated or excluded from the overall scoring by stage, but led into the next stage. It's done by a stage-by-stage basis. So who would be excluded using K equals 3? Again, this is more permissive, letting more jurors through. Only 8 juror exclusions occur. That's out of 68 total juror stage scores that are submitted. And that's spread across 7 jurors, with Eva Pobocka getting excluded twice in stage 2 and stage 3. So the plot thickens here, I think. And what if we lower the boom to 1.5? We're going to exclude more jurors in more stages, and indeed we do. There are 8 jurors excluded, but 13 exclusions total. And remarkably, I think Garrick Olson excluded in all 4 stages of the competition using this K equals 1.5 constant that was applied at the Chopin competition in the United States in Nashville, a local competition a couple of years ago. So let's see how things would have changed in final results if we use first K equals 3, followed by K equals 1.5. So again, final results here on the left. Let's apply those 8 juror exclusions spread across 7 jurors and see how things would have changed. So first off the bat, you see David Khrukuli launching himself into 5th place. Previously, we saw him land at 6th place when we were looking at one of the single juror exclusions. But now that we're doing multiple juror exclusions by stage, we're moving the needle a bit more. David, his low scores were jumping out to the model and excluding those low scores and excluding the jurors whose low scores were contributing to the juror outliers helps David a lot. On the flip side, those exclusions are hurting Vincent Ong. He would be eliminated after stage 3. William Yang would have fallen out of 6th spot because we don't have 2 ties spread around anymore. We just have the tie for 3rd rather than ties for 4th and 5th. So he falls out of the prize pool. And there are, of course, some changes that happened earlier in the competition at stage 1, 2, as well as stage 3, as I mentioned, which we're not able to model how, again, Gabby Strata, for example, would have done in stage 3 if he had been able to advance under this EOJ methodology as he would have. Now, let's look at K equals 1.5 and see what happens. So again, the final results as is, as published. And let's do additional juror exclusions. David Khrukuli again lands in 5th place. This is with more juror exclusions and just reinforces what we found earlier. A couple more on the downside. Zitong Wang dropping all the way from 3rd down to 6th place. Vincent Ong and William Yang falling out of the prize pool. There are no ties to go around. So instead of having 8 prizes, we only have 6 instead of 8, so they fall out of the rankings. And Piotr Aleksevich, in this case, gets excluded after stage 3. Some folks would have advanced farther into the competition, as is always the case. And I think the really remarkable one here is, again, Gabby Strata with a K equals 1.5 exclusion of outlier jurors. Gabby would have climbed all the way up to 11th place after stage 2, firmly among those who would have advanced to stage 3. Remember, he was 22nd place after stage 2. So this removing the outliers really is benefiting Gabby. Who knows how he would have done in stage 3? He might have made it all the way to stage 4, if not the podium among the medal winners under this EOJ. K equals 1.5 methodology that was applied a couple years ago at an actual competition. So intriguing. It's pretty provocative what this shows us. So does this analysis necessarily provide justice for Khrukuli? Perhaps, or perhaps not. But what it does provide, I think, is a case for a more thoughtful approach to scoring in the Chopin competition, from how juror-student relationships are defined to how outliers are handled. And I think it also makes clear that the audience's strong support for David this year was no anomaly. He left a lasting impression, and I think this analysis helps underscore that. So thanks a lot for watching part 2 of my 2-part analysis of the 2025 Chopin competition. And whether you agree or disagree with how I came about analyzing the data, please let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and suggestions. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.